All right, so welcome everybody to today's NYU PRIISM seminar. We're absolutely delighted to have Professor Erin Buchanan joining us. Dr. Erin Buchanan is a professor of cognitive analytics at Harrisburg University of Science and Technology. Dr. Buchanan's primary research interests are broadly connected by a meta-science focus on statistics and computational linguistics. In her statistics research, she has published numerous articles on the development and assessment of valid questionnaires and the application of multi-group analyses to understand the diversity of participant responses. Her computational linguistics research has emphasized inquiry into the storage of language that relies on actuarial analyses of complex semantic networks. And today, Dr. Buchanan will talk to us about big team science and big method opportunities. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Erin, and take it away.
Perfect, thanks. I'm actually going to talk about the combination of all of those things. So kind of a nice introduction, appreciate it. Thanks for joining me this morning. I'm really excited to be here and thanks for the invitation. I don't normally get to talk about the whole of this project, so it's a really fun opportunity for me as well. All right, so quick outline of what I'm going to go over. I'm going to talk a little bit about big team science. If you aren't familiar with the current movement in the social sciences, it's clearly, I saw a bunch of biostats folks. This has been going on in medicine and physics for quite some time. And a case study of what we're jokingly called the SPAML, which is a study about semantic priming. And so a little bit on what semantic priming is, how we selected the stimuli using computational methods, powering a study that maybe doesn't have a hypothesis test, adaptive sampling to ensure the best use of participant time and effort, and then what's happened so far. So I'm using this as a case study to talk about the integration of applied statistical techniques to more traditional cognitive science. So if we think about collaborations in science, we could define collaboration as anything more than one person. So two or more people working together. And so big team science, which is the sort of new catchphrase, is big collaborations. And so our definition that we made up for a different study is 10 or more authors at 10 or more institutions. Because if anyone has ever worked with a human subjects IRB, you know that that can be a lot, right? And so multiply that times everyone else's IRB. And so dealing with institutional red tape at one institution is hard enough, but then once you start to collaborate, it can be a lot more difficult. And so there's kind of two big types, at least in the social sciences right now, where there are individual projects. So the Open Science Collaboration is a very famous one. They published a paper in, I think, 2015 about the reproducibility of psychology. And there are many others that are just kind of one-off projects. Okay? And then there are organizations that help collaborate and make these projects happen. So I'm part of the Psych Science Accelerator, which is who is helping me make this project happen. There's also the many X's. So we've got many analyst papers that might be of interest to this team about how one data set and one hypothesis can lead to many statistical analyses. But then there's many labs, many babies who do developmental research, many primates. So the mini minis, sorry, joke. Then there's a fun group called NutNet that's about nutritional resources in soil and feeding humans, and Dragnet, which is more about the grasslands. So these are slowly becoming more popular as a way to organize these big projects. Okay. And why do big team science? Well, it's made possible by the internet, obviously. So I have meetings with people all over the globe, which is really cool and has allowed me to expand my understanding of how science happens in places that I wouldn't get to go to normally. But also because of the credibility revolution, sometimes called the replication crisis or psychology's renaissance, depending on who you're talking to. But this idea that our methods and our statistical analyses are potentially partially to blame for the fact that some things don't reproduce, right? Other than sampling. Obviously, sampling is a huge concept that potentially I think many psychologists forget happens, but as stats people, I think we understand that sampling is also a big part of this. And so these are spurred by these different movements, but also the weird science trend. So if you're not familiar with this term, it's Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, which is that most human studies are in areas that meet these criteria, like the United States, North America, Western Europe is another big area. So, you know, South America exists, the global South exists, but maybe we aren't studying people, we're studying weird people. And so the big team science movements try to solve some of these problems. Okay, and it is very successful, at least in psychology. So there are journals that devote entire subsections to replication reports, which often are done by big teams to replicate in a very large sample to kind of get a good idea of whether or not things actually work. Okay, so that's the Journal for Methods and Practices in Psych. Okay. The accelerator has 5 experimental data publications, and it started probably 3 to 5 years ago, and 5+ register reports that are currently ongoing, including myself. So we are fairly successful at creating these large studies and getting them across the finish line. Okay. And there's a lot of increasing interest and investment into these types of projects. So people are beginning to see that this is fruitful work. And unless you're the person coordinating the study, it's often not a lot of work. So that's also a big bonus. Okay. And if you care about metrics, right? So a lot of us have thought about how impact factors and citation counts may not be the best measure of impact. But if you care about metrics, they tend to be published in big journals and have high impact. Okay. So what's next? Well, we've started this, what now? So this is really where I want to go with this talk. And because you're working in these huge teams, you really have to stop and rethink the methodology that you use, right? So de-weirding the study. So that's specific to my study. That may not be true to like a mini analyst paper, right? But we have to think about the human population that we're sampling, or if you're not using people, the people who are involved in our studies, right? So not only in linguistics, not only are the humans involved and the languages involved weird, but also the people publishing the studies tend to be weird. So how do we sort of de-weird across all of those components? Right? Oops, there we go. Power and correspondingly the analyses, right? Sampling of people. And so I'm going to talk about each one of those kind of in turn. Okay. So let me tell you a little bit about the accelerator. It's a CERN for psychological science. It's kind of our cute catchphrase, with more than 1,000 members in 82 to 100 countries, kind of depending on what day it is. So we have a large population of folks who are involved in one way or another. So that's everything from data collection, helping get participants in Argentina, for example, to methodologists. We have a good number of methodologists, and the admin, the people who run the studies. Okay. And we focus on open science principles and practices. I say we because I'm one of the associate directors. Okay. And so a lot of time making sure that everything we do is also open and reproducible. Okay. And so my study, I got lucky somehow. I'm 007, which is kind of fun. There are lots of silly jokes here, but the study itself is also kind of, if you're a markdown person, a play on YAML. So kind of a couple of embedded jokes, but the study itself is about priming. Okay. So priming is a long-standing topic in cognitive psych. I mean, we're talking like 50+ years of research on priming, and it really was going on before the Meyer and Schandeveld 1972 paper, which is like the seminal one. We've been studying associations for a long time. And so what it is that when we are reading along, you are speeded, made faster, for things that are related versus unrelated, right? So if I give you cat, dog in order, you're faster at dog than if you saw tree, dog, okay? Because cat, dog is a related word pair semantically, meaning they have similar definitions. They're both pets, they have fur, right? And this semantic priming is very consistent. right? As long as you're using well understood stimuli in this study, which is another methodological question, you can usually get semantic priming. So what people are studying is that as a window into cognitive processing, right? The black box up here. It's often measured with a lexical decision task or a naming task. So lexical decision is just so boring, my poor students, right? Is this a word or not? Yes, no, 800 times. So they tend to be fairly mind-numbing tasks, or naming, where you just read the words aloud. And so a famous study in this area, Semantic Priming Project, which is 10 years old, makes me feel very old because I was involved in this project and it feels like yesterday and not 10 years ago. But Keith Hutchison organized the Semantic Priming Project, and that provided a data set for 1,600 English word pairs of priming values for, cat, dog, and a bunch of other related words. And the great thing is that this allowed me to think about how to do this in a big team way. So semantic priming replicates really well. It's pretty easy. There were some studies on priming old people walking. So like if you primed people with the idea of being older, you supposedly would walk slower. This is a famous study at the beginning of the credibility revolution that didn't replicate. So everybody was like, priming doesn't replicate. And I'm like, hold on a minute. Semantic priming replicates. That is a weird study. So, we know that we'll probably find it. But most of the research in priming is on weird words, right? In English, especially English and European languages. Okay, there's a ton of Dutch because several of the people who are fairly big in this area are Dutch. So it's kind of weird because I wouldn't have put Dutch in my category of most well-studied languages, but it is. So now within a study on semantic priming, there's often a focus on one language at a time, which just is a practical issue because it takes a lot of effort. So you might just be studying Spanish or Mandarin, for example, or multilingual humans. So I want to understand second language processing, or, how do people who speak multiple languages keep all that stuff straight in their head? Okay. It's a large area of research understanding how storage occurs. And so if you're studying the multilingual humans, you might get two languages in there, like Spanish and English together, for example. It's a very popular pair combination because of the demographics in the United States. But there's almost no data sets. So as a statistician on the side, data sets, I'm like, where's the data here? That we can use that are matched on the language. So meaning I have cat, dog in English and Spanish and German, etc. And even though there are a lot of data sets out there, once I start to put them together, there's a lot of holes. And so we sort of end up with a ton of data that isn't corresponding that I can use to model, for example. And so my question was, okay, how do I use all these computational skills that are available in NLP and natural language processing research and open data publications to improve this? So this is the big methods part. Okay, so the goals of the SPAN project overall are to assess semantic priming in at least 10 languages. I think we have 8 done, and then we have a couple of bonus ones. So we're running 25 and we'll probably finish 15 in time for the first publication. Okay. And then provide the data. Please take the data, please use it, is our goal. Okay. And it is a registered report at Nature and Human Behavior right now. Okay. And so kind of some support for my idea that linguistics is a weird area of research. I did this with some other linguists, looking at the author affiliation and the languages sampled within linguistics. And you can see that it's heavily biased towards North America and English. Okay. And then you also do see a lot of, we've kind of labeled this as Chinese, but that's both Mandarin and Cantonese. A lot of research also in Asia is pretty popular. So where is Latin America in all of this? Where is the global South, right? How do we begin to work with African languages, for example? So how do I do that? Well, what people normally do when they create stimuli for priming studies is they pull out an old set that they've used forever, or they take one of these giant available databases and they pull words that are related. Okay, so similarity is the shared meaning between concepts, and you could define that on face value. Right? So dog cat is more related than dog spoon, unless you've given this exact example 500 times like I have. We could use what are called feature production norms. So what makes a dog a dog? People say tails, fur, pet. What makes a cat a cat? Tails, fur, pets. They have very similar features. You could use free association. So there's this huge project called Small World of Words, which is trying to collect a bunch of data across languages for this. So they have English and Dutch done. And so I think some of the Japanese and Chinese are also almost done. And that's just, what's the first word you think of when you hear dog? Okay. And what we did instead, because all of those are limited by what's available to us at the moment, is using some new, well, they're not new, but people perceive them as new computational models and open text corpora. Okay, so that I'm not limited to just what's already out there, because I've already started with the problem is there's not enough out there. Okay. So where do I get big, huge open text corpora? Right? Well, thankfully, there's a really cool data set called the Open Subtitles Corpus. It has linguistic data for 50 plus languages. I think it's about 64, and not all of them are usable because of different issues, but it's a huge data set that's freely available. And subtitles have this cool distinction that and I just did the reference dump here, because they're just been shown to be very good at predicting word frequency, which I always tell my students, if you don't know the answer is word frequency, because it predicts nearly everything in linguistics. And so that's nice, because we're using data that we know is useful. Okay. And they're freely available to download. They are quite large. But what we did was we took 43 of the languages that had enough data and a computational model to part of speech tag them. And so, we started with nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. These are the big four, is what I joke in my class, that determine meaning in sentences. The rest of the sentence is the glue that holds them together. Okay. And so we had to know, right? If I'm going to start with nouns and adjectives, I have to know what the nouns and adjectives are. So there's a package called UDPipe, Universal Dependencies Pipeline. It's a package in R that has part of speech models for a very large number of languages, and 43 of them overlapped with what was available in the Open Subtitles corpus. Okay, so I just give you a little example here of what it does for you. So given the sentences, it will tag part of speech. It works really well. And the other big package in Python is Spacey, which also has a good number of models, but UDPipe actually has more. So we use that one. And so we took each of those language corpora with an available model. And the corpora are also sometimes paired with Wikipedia to add more words to the data set. And so we had to do that for 5 of them. So because we wanted to include some of these languages that don't ever get studied in normal linguistics research. And so we took out all the stop words, the, and, a, of, into, between, all these extra words that don't carry most of the meaning in the sentence. Okay. And then anything less than 3 characters was also removed, except for logographic languages, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, because character is a different thing there. So then I picked nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. Using word frequency from those data sets, we took the top 10,000 words in each language and then calculated similarity. So this is one of the methods components. So there are models available, fast text models. These are, if you've heard of Word2Vec, it's just a different version of Word2Vec. If you've heard of BERT, it's kind of a similar idea. But basically you build a representation of the language. Okay? And when you have those tensors, these huge math matrices, I can calculate the relationship between any two words by essentially using a correlation or a cosine distance between them in those matrices, right? And that comes to us from the Subs2Vec project. Subs2Vec is subtitles to vectors. So they calculated these fast text models across all of these languages. And we're doing something very similar as well in our lab with this data. And calculated vector similarity. Okay. So we've got 10,000 words in each language separately. That are the most frequent words. You pick frequent words so that people know them, because it's very hard when you're asked to say, is this a word or not, if we give you a word you've never seen before. Okay. So from that, I pulled the top 5 cosine values for each word. And so in theory, you end up with 50,000 pairs across, each language separately. Then using some really bad Google Translate, we put that all together. Okay? And so this is an interesting question for linguists of like how much that matches. So if I'm taking the most frequent words and then grabbing their most related friend, so to speak, how much does that even cross-reference, right? So this gets at the idea that culturally language can be very different. And then, you have the issue of the fact that within languages, you also have these cultural variations that we can't totally control for. And so we merge them all together. Okay, let's see what happens. It actually ends up being 1.2 million combinations. So it surprisingly doesn't overlap as much as you would like it to. There are things that are very universal, like brother, sister, color relationships, years, and not years, months and days of the week. Okay, so, and then there's some common ones like off and on end up in the data set because of translation. And that is a very strong pair for most languages. And so there's an average overlap of 3%. That's like 2 languages overlapping, but it ranges up to 70%. So what we did was we sorted that by the amount of overlap, how many times that word pair occurred in our 43 languages, and picked the most frequent ones. Okay, but that's still fairly difficult. So this is just your simple frequency chart of the amount of overlap across word pairs. And so you have a couple here on the right-hand side that are very easy, right? Those are the ones that overlap a lot, but they also cross overlap. So it's like Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Friday. You can't pick all of those. And so the mean overlap is about 28% in the final data set. Okay? And that means that when we were asking people to check our translations, they had to check like 700 pairs. Okay? That doesn't take as long as it sounds. They were more annoyed at the fact the consent form was so long. But I think this really highlights that it would be easy to start with English and translate into these other languages, but then what are we studying, right? So if we started with English and translate, for example, back to Korean, what we're studying is English Korean. And what we actually want to do using these cool methods is to study language and let the languages drive the selection of the stimuli, not the researcher. And this helps with the D-weird problem. But what that also means is that you have pairs, once you get the translation back, that are very strange in English, that people will be like, I would never use that. I'm like, well, that's because people in Eastern Europe would use that, and that came up, and you got it back translated to you, so it'll be fine. So we have a nice range of relationships, and some that should work really well, and some that maybe won't work because it's culturally from some other language. And so our final related pairs, we have 1,000 word pairs. So that's 1,000 of 2 words, so 2,000 words. Using each word only once, although we do have some cognates of words that are very similar. Words were not different forms of the same word within pair. So don't use run and running, because that's a different type of priming. Okay. Limiting the use of proper names. Romeo and Juliet made it into the data set, and that word pair works really well. So that seems to be one of those quite cross-cultural things. and Sherlock and Watson as well, but otherwise not too many proper names. And then the point I was getting a minute ago that it's driven by the language, not the English translation. Okay. Now, to create the unrelated pairs to compare to, you just scramble everything, but you have to scramble it in a way that you don't make new related pairs. So this is a very exciting procedure of me just hitting randomize until we get the pair limits down to where the number of related pairs is very low in the unrelated section. My R code just has a little note that says do this until it stops, because it's not kind of unpredictable what randomization will work. Okay. So practically though, we then had to generate non-words, and non-words are just things that look like words but aren't. So you want people to, in this decision-making task, to know it's a non-word, so it can't be too close, but not so weird, like it doesn't have any vowels, for example. Okay. And so we're using what's called a Wuggy-like algorithm, and this is the idea that you change the number of letters based on the number of syllables, so that longer words have a syllable that's legal in that language, but isn't legal there in that word. So it makes some very interesting looking words. And so generating that also is a different type of computer algorithm. What words are very close, but I can switch this syllable out for that syllable and it's legal and it's the same length and the same this and that. So more code. But then translators help us check everything. I don't know where we would be without our translators. They're amazing people, and I appreciate their patience in this study, helping us make sure that we have fake words that are actually fake. Because I tell them, I'm like, this is a computer algorithm. I could have made up a real word that I just didn't know was real. And we did. We made up some words that were slang for things that weren't appropriate, so they had to help us change them. And then also maintaining that Q-target relationship. So for our related word pairs, we are keeping that relationship accurate. So sometimes when we translated, it went to the verb, but they were like, no, this needs to be the noun form for that one, for example. Okay. And then they help us fix our non-words to make sure that they're pronounceable, not too fake, and not words that you shouldn't show people. Okay. We also have to consider dialect. So we have separate ones for Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese, although they overlap quite a bit. The Spanish team got together and did some magic. So we have a set of words that all the different forms of Spanish could agree on, and then the instructions are what we change. So we have Argentinian, I think Chilean Spanish, so more global South Spanish, and then more European Spanish. But they could agree on the words at least. Now, how do you design a power for this kind of study, right? So I know how many pairs I'm going to have. I have 1,000 pairs. So N is sort of set, right? And 1,000 pairs should give me enough of a power to detect the small samples, a small effect size. Great. But how many people should I put into those items so that I have the 1,000 pairs, but I have enough of sampling on each pair to know that they're measured well, so that when I get to my 1,000 pairs and I'm doing my t-test, for example, that I've done it well. Okay. And so this is a question too for linguistics folks who like to make databases of like, what actual sample size should we use for our studies? Because those database studies don't have hypothesis tests. It's just like, here's the data, it's cool, let's use it. Okay. So as most of you will know, it's generally driven by the research design, our choice of hypothesis tests, right, and our effect size estimation. But we know maybe I don't have some of these things, and we know that there's not a one-to-one relationship between hypothesis and statistical analysis, right? So what can I do? Well, what people normally do is they say, okay, well, at least 30. Central limit theorem, huzzah, right? And so at least in cognitive science, there's this long-standing tradition to use these controlled stimuli because we're trying to pinpoint this one process going on in the brain. And people publish these norms because because a very large journal, Behavior Research Methods, will publish them, and that's a good journal. So there, there's an outlet, and people are interested in reusing this data. Okay. And so most people have ignored power and sample size in norming data collection. I'm currently one of the associate editors for this, so I've been like trying to push, like, you need more than 30. You need to give me a reason why 30 is appropriate, right? And power can be difficult. We were joking before we started about how everything is a multi-level model problem, and cognitive sciences when we have these nested study designs, that can be very complicated for folks to estimate. So what we're doing is we're actually going to borrow from Ken Kelly and use the accuracy and parameter estimation. Okay? And that shifts the focus away from p-values and confidence intervals to confidence intervals, that are sufficiently narrow. Okay? As all of you know, there's a relationship between p-values and confidence intervals, right? But instead of thinking about getting p below a magic number, I'm going to focus on measuring my data well. And this is sort of Bayesian, although I'm mostly a frequentist, so I'm like going to say it's Bayesian with a light touch, right? So what you do is you define some minimum acceptable sample size, okay? And that can be from simulation, that can be from your own lab. I know I can get at least 50. There are a lot of subjective ways that we can do this. Okay? Define a stopping rule. This is where you figure out what sufficiently narrow means to you, and then figure out your maximum. Okay? So this is almost like sequential testing in Bayes. Okay, almost, very close actually. Okay. So for example, how did I do this? Well, the English Lexicon Project has lexical decision times for over 40,000 words. So this is a great data set to simulate from. What should I expect sufficiently narrow to mean? Okay. And a lot of Ken's papers are the more mathematical proofs of what sufficiently narrow could mean. But this is like a minimum effect size of interest. Like, how wide do you expect? At least it's not going to include 0, for example, might be narrow. Okay. And so this provides me a good metric to sort of base my answers on, and allows us also to think about the fact that every human has some base rate variable response in their ability to whack the keyboard. And so we can control for those inherent differences by using z-scores, okay? Or multi-level models. But let's think about our stopping rule. What would a narrow confidence interval be for response latencies? Because these vary quite a bit, right? So 300 milliseconds wouldn't be unusual. 1200 milliseconds wouldn't be unusual. Okay? And what parameter am I actually trying to estimate? Okay. Should I estimate the effect size of the priming? Well, that's like removed 3 times from the data, because I calculate the average for each item, and then I subtract the item pairs from each other, and then I end up at priming. So maybe I just want to say, well, my response latencies are well measured and priming is what it is, right? And so if we look at the distribution, and it's long on purpose, of priming latencies, these are z-scored, so 0, not priming latencies, I'm sorry, response latencies. We've got a couple words, they're so tiny, you can't see them out here, that are very weird, that people take a long time to respond to in the English Lexicon Project. They're words that you would have not seen, but maybe once in your entire life. And then we have a whole bunch of words that people respond to very fast. So the average standard error is 0.16. And I pick standard error because it's what creates our confidence interval. Okay. So I can either pick the median or the mean here. And okay, so if I say this data is representative of the data I'm going to get later, what sample size would I need for each word pair to approximate a standard error of 0.16? Okay. And so I simulated, I picked 100 randomly sampled words from this data with sample sizes ranging from 5 to 200. Each dot is a simulation. And the line here is where my standard error would be below 0.16 for each item. And you can see that like there's a point at which most of the items end up below that. I think it's 50, well, in theory, 80% of the items would be below 0.16 is my standard error at 25, a sample of 25, but that felt weird to say 25 when I was arguing that n equals 30 was not a good justification. So instead we picked, I think 50 as our starting point, assuming that the data might be more variable. Okay. And so we went with 95% power. This isn't really power, but 95% of the items would be below our sufficiently narrow window. And so the minimum sample size would be 50. And then, which I'm not going to show on a slide, we did this again with the semantic priming project data to define the maximum sample size on priming scores themselves. And we came up with n equals 320. Okay. So we have the rules: minimum's 50, maximum's 320. The stopping rule is actually 0.12 because we averaged the two different standard errors that we might find. Okay. So in the English lexicon project, the standard error is a little high because there are a lot of weird words. In the semantic priming project, the standard error is much lower because they're high frequency words. So we just took the middle and said, okay, the stopping rule is 0.12 because that defines our sufficiently narrow confidence interval for the response latencies. Cool. Now, how do you actually implement that in the study? So this is kind of one of the last big methods that we put into this study, other than pre-registration, right? So we collect data for our minimum sample size, okay, which we have to because nature, human behavior said we did. And as the study is running in the background, it runs a little R script once an hour because there's too much data at this point that calculates the standard error for every response latency and puts them into buckets. So these need more, these can wait. And so if a confidence interval meets the criteria, it puts it into the these can wait bucket. If it doesn't, it says I need more data here. Continue collection, yeah. And then we'll randomly sample. So it starts sampling from the needs more bucket. And then if you don't have enough, let's say you have 2 pairs left that need words, need more participants, you can't just show 1 participant 2 pairs. So then it picks from the other ones. So it's a probabilistic sampling procedure based on starting with the ones that need more participants to meet our criteria and then picking from everybody. Okay. So what you end up with is the words that are really variable and we're not super confident or sure about get sampled more. So we put the data towards things that we have less confidence in. Right? And so I've been really trying to push for folks to use these adaptive algorithms. So if we create these large data sets and participant attention is sort of this finite resource, we can only show them so many pairs. And I can't show them both manipulations. So what I do is I show them a part of the data or a part of the stimuli and then bias my data collection towards things that need more information. Okay. So here's an example of the item variability, right? There is quite a variable relationship. This is from the semantic priming project of the priming scores in the data. So those are z-scores. So it ranges from -1 to almost 2. And so we're going to put more participants in words that have more variability to see if we can figure out, is it variable because it is, or is it variable because we have a couple of people in our n equals 30? Right? Some of them are variable because it is. Okay. All right. So yeah, we already talked about all this. Okay. This is just the more practical implementation of that. And I would prefer to show you this. So here's practically for methodologically like how the study runs. So it runs in lab.js, which calculates response latencies in browser for us. So this is run online, which has its own associated problems. And that particular software reads our stimuli set from a separate file. It's all stored in a SQLite data file on the server. Every once in a while, we have an R script that runs in the background that says, well, here's the current data, here's the old data. here's where we're at, run these words, and writes our stimuli file out. And then we actually have the ability for researchers to view their participants. So this just allows them to give credit and or pay people if they're using something like Prolific. Okay. It is currently about 20 gigs of data. So we have quite a bit. I clicked, there we go. So very briefly, I'm going to tell you what the study does and then what the results are, because this is the most exciting part for cognitive people. But what people see, get this all on here at once, is a lexical decision task where you are judging each word one at a time. So you see 800 trials. There are breaks for your poor brain, and you are simply like, yes, it's a word, no, it's not, over and over and over again. Okay. And the way that you know, or that we know that they're related, is they're in order. So these two pairs are the related pair and they're in order. And then these two pairs are unrelated, so we grab those out. So the order is what determines their experimental condition. Okay. So they see a fixation cross in the middle of the screen to capture their attention. We show the cue and target in a serif font, unless we're talking about like Japanese. And then people say word or nonsense word. But one of the biggest unexpected problems is keyboards. And so if you've never thought about keyboard layouts, they're wild. Like even QWERTY layouts vary quite a bit differently between American keyboards and British keyboards. So it took us a while too to figure out what were the best placement of people's hands on the keyboard so that they're doing this, which is the normal, instead of like this. So the experiment is varied by region, what keys they're using on the keyboard. Chinese was the most difficult because they have the most varied types of keyboards. Okay. Either one, Cantonese or Mandarin. Okay. So we have a whole bunch of data for folks, every single trial in order, bam, 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 bam. The item data, so each item averaged, the priming data, so related word pairs compared to unrelated word pairs. And all this data will be open source. Okay, so big thanks to ZPID, who helped pay for several samples, and my university, who paid for a couple of samples. This picture is very old. I forgot to change it out, but this is kind of like what our teammates can see. Right? So what happened? Here's the fun part. What happened? Right? And so priming at 0 would be bad. And so these are the distributions of the priming results in the 6 languages that were kind of done and processed when I made this presentation. The bar is the mean priming level, and they're all above 0. Whew. I don't have to go explain to Nature Human Behavior why the most consistent thing in the world didn't happen in my study, so that makes me happy. Okay. If I instead turn them on their side so we can compare their confidence intervals directly, so these are 95% confidence intervals, some interesting things are starting to happen. I don't know if this is still true. English is actually getting smaller and smaller as we go, because I think what we're seeing is that by not selecting English word pairs, we're seeing that English priming is not as large as it normally is, because we're not driving the data from there. Okay. Now English, Czech, and Turkish, or English is clearly lower than everybody else. Not too surprising that it's similar to Turkish. And then we have Japanese and Korean have similar backgrounds. Okay. I was very surprised that Japanese was the highest, actually. Okay. There's no reason for the colors to match here, but if I line them all up and I look at like, is there priming at all in these word pairs? What you see is about 700 pairs show a positive priming score. Okay, positive is good. That means priming. Okay, the related word pair is faster. So that's cool. Some of these negative ones down here, I don't know what's going on because we're slowing people down and words that should be related. But then you got Romeo and Juliet up here, speeding everybody up. Okay, so this is also a good thing for us. But then the real interesting questions are the cross-cultural questions. Okay. So my cute little donut plot here, because you can't make a pie graph, right? And there should be numbers on here. I don't know where my numbers went, but the 20% one is a 6. So this is 20% of word pairs prime in every language. That is wild. That means that they have a positive score across all 6 languages, 33%, 5, and then it works its way down. So there's only 1% of pairs that only prime in one language. Okay? And so this is very cool because that level of consistency is a bit unexpected, I think. Because culturally, all these languages are very different. I mean, if you look at the ones we've started with, we're talking about English, Japanese, Korean, Russian, and Turkish, and Czech, like culturally very different places as well. However, that does not mean that the relationships are correlated. So the correlation between matching pairs in languages are all very low. That's not terribly surprising because there's no particular reason to believe that Romeo and Juliet should have the same high relationship in all of them. It does, but this shows that while there is consistency, it's not like a perfect map of the word pairs on each other. And so we're working on a different paper on like what might be the reason why these correlations are fairly low, and we should expect them to be. But it is cool because it's consistent, but also still shows cross-cultural variation. Okay. So let me wrap all this up because the priming stuff is cool, but this was mostly about methods, right? So the work is meant to diversify the participants involved in the study, the languages involved in the study, and the researchers involved in the study. So I'm really trying to hit home that we're trying to diversify more people. Unfortunately, our admin team is still fairly weird, but we've really worked hard to pull in folks who wouldn't normally be represented in these papers. Okay. Priming effects are found, woohoo, especially different writing systems. So that's another cool effect. Okay. And the variability between languages isn't zero, but isn't large. So that's kind of an interesting result for cognitive folks because you might expect due to culture, writing system, grammatical differences, right, word differences that you would see larger effects, but you don't, they're pretty small. Okay. And we're currently working on more languages. We have finished Danish and German, and the results are very similar. Okay. So we actually do invite people to play along with us. If you want to learn more about the study, we've got our cool QR code. And all kinds of researchers are welcome. And we actually do provide authorship for those who are able to contribute to our credit, the traditional credit system. So analyses, data collection, et cetera. And that's it.
Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. I'm going to thank you on behalf of everybody. So thank you so much. And let's open it up for questions.
I will hit stop. Because I cannot see the chat.
Actually, no questions in the chat yet, but if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question or ask it in chat, please feel free to do so.
I'll do so and because I'm happy to ask the dumb questions. So when I've tried to do the way smaller versions of this, even with two universities, the IRB stuff gets super complicated because like NYU says it's fine, but somewhere else says it's not, or, God forbid you've got like a Department of Ed involved or, that it's madness. So how have you had to navigate this, or is this also, I mean, it seems like the kind of study you're doing are fairly low. It doesn't seem like you're not like fooling people or whatever. So maybe it's just not such an issue, but if you could speak to any kinds of those challenges and how you've overcome them, I'd love to hear about that.
Yes. So we do have this issue, especially with GDPR. Once you start working with Europeans, it's a good thing because they're protecting participant rights, right? So we tend to classify this into 3 different categories: people who have to do their own IRB. And so those are the most difficult ones because we've kind of got to work within their university system, and we give them as much as we can for their IRB. Then people who can rely on the host IRB, which would be me in this case. So they just write us a little letter like, since it's approved at your institution, we're fine relying on your IRB. And then unbelievably, there are many places that don't have any ethics, anything, right? So they just write us a letter saying there's no ethical review at their institution, or exempt studies aren't reviewed. So like in Italy, they just, if it's exempt, whatever, we're not going to even talk about it, which is interesting. And that framework really helps like navigate the IRB system, because there are places that don't realize that they can do just rely on their IRB. And then for the ones that have to do we have to do the big, huge thing, you do have those problems. of like, oh no, I need them to have the participant code at the beginning, and they have to be able to withdraw their data, and they have to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And so there are probably 150 different versions of the study. It doesn't look like it in the background because you have to manipulate all those little components for each person. So, I mean, I could go on about this forever. If you have questions, happy to tell you more through email.
Super interesting. I will let other people ask other questions, but you know, if no one steps up, I've got more questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, I'm involved in a few big team collaborations, you know, spanning 40-ish countries or something like that.
Mhm.
And one thing that I think about a lot, I mean, now I'm fortunate enough not to be junior anymore, is the issue of credit when you end up with 40 to 50 authors on a paper, which for me is quite common.
Mhm.
So what advice do you have for either like the junior people in the audience about that, or the senior people in terms of making sure that their junior students, faculty,
Right.
getting adequate credit for, you know, the work
What they're
that's
doing.
involved in a 40-person collaboration?
Yeah, we just did one with 500 people. Don't recommend, mostly because the journal systems are not prepared for you to deal with that. So we do use the credit system officially when we do these studies. And we've been treating it like a classroom. And so we have a little grade book that we use to keep track of, like, these are our translators. So that goes into resources under credit, right? And these are the data collection teams, and I have their IRBs to make sure we're covered. And that goes under investigation, I think. So at the end of the project, I have that a huge list. If you haven't heard of Tenzing, it's a really cool app that allows you to convert credit categories into like a statement so that each person gets, it says what they did in the study. It also will do a whole YAML for you to put all the authors in there. It's magical. And before we start, something that our team started, I don't know if other places do this, we have a collaboration agreement. So it essentially outlines, like, here are the different categories that you can contribute to, and here's what a minimum requirement is for authorship. It's usually 2 credit categories. And here's how we sort them within tiers. So the admin team gets to go first because they're doing the most work for credit purposes. And then it's, you know, alphabetized within data collection teams, and then it's randomized here, like however you're going to do it. And so just being straightforward at the beginning is really helpful because people know what they're getting themselves into. But then my big thing is that we often lose the students because these aren't short projects, right? Ever. So I've been really pushing that we make sure that, okay, your entire team is in our little grade book, right? So I have the students and their information, and if they disappear, they disappear, but at least it wasn't because you forgot to tell me that this student was involved and did the data collection work for you, and you were just the supervisor, right? So we've been trying to really push, like, you're going to tell me what your role was, and here are my students, and they collected the data and I just supervised, so that those are different credit categories too. Does that answer your question? So, you know,
Yeah.
it's hard maybe to be,
Or interesting to hear.
yeah, it's hard to be high in the authorship list without being the person running it. But at least they can know, okay, well, if I collect data, I'll at least be somewhere here in the authorship list.
Yeah, my teams use group authorship with journals a lot that have a lower bar for what it takes to be involved. So if you're involved anywhere in the process, you're in the like 300-person group authorship list, but that doesn't,
Right.
like, when I am, that's not on my CV, but it is on my Google Scholar.
Right, right. Psych people do not like the consortium model.
Right, I'm mostly in medicine.
Yeah. So that is the thing that, so what you'll see in psych is these huge 500-person authorship papers, because people, you just can't get them to agree to consortiumship kind of system, because for a lot of countries that won't count for them on their tenure promotion packets, but if they're 400th, it will. So we're trying to, that bias is because of the implications for who can participate in the studies.
And so many things to think about, right?
I've learned so much about the difference. I mean, just the differences in IRBs, but also just about how other academic systems work, and trying to not continue to cause the problem of we can't get these people involved because we're using a system that doesn't benefit them in any way. So what incentives can we offer that do benefit them so that we're getting the incentive of getting them involved, right?
And
Oh,
there's 59 countries.
How many?
59.
I was actually wondering during your talk if you have any examples off the top of your head of pairs of words that have a strong relationship in a language other than English that one might find surprising, that they don't have an obvious relationship in English, or actually, especially I was thinking of your donut plot, and I was wondering if there are, pairs that have strong relationships in like every language other than English in your study that are kind of, when you hear them in English, you're like, oh, they're not obviously related. If you have anything off the top of your head, I would just be curious.
Pyramid structure.
Okay.
Is one, right? Because we don't think about pyramids in the same way that somebody who might be closer to Egypt would think about pyramids, right? That's one that doesn't really work in English. There is a translation of some like traditional Chinese names like Ming and Ling, but the biggest problem with that one in English is that it's a phonemic, right? So if I was to say it out loud, they also would prime. So it kind of works, but most participants are like, what are these words? These aren't real words. One of the bigger issues was some languages don't have two different words for something that we do have two different words for, like abduct and kidnap. A lot of languages don't have a separation for those two words. So we had to come up with something similar to keep the target word the same. Okay. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so culturally Arabic, we had to drop, I want to say, like almost 100 words because they were inappropriate. Like words related to alcohol, we weren't allowed to show folks. So we'll have an incomplete set in Arabic, but that's a cultural issue, so.
Yeah, thank you so much. So just in the interest of time, I want to thank you again. So I'm going to clap on behalf of everybody again, and just let folks know that you can feel free to drop off. Erin, I don't know if you have more time or if other folks have questions, or but since we're at time, I just wanted to make that announcement.
Yeah, that's up to you guys. I could talk about this project all day. You don't want to hear me talk about it all day, though, I'm sure. So I appreciate all of you coming as well if you need to go.
Oh, I just have one question. Can I ask you?
Sure.
I think, right, the way you look at this, the diversity, linguistic diversity, just by particular language, like Chinese, English, and Spanish, for example. But you also mentioned the way in which the language might also vary, like the different version of Spanish, right, that they used in different Latin American countries versus in Spain. But I think there's also another issue. Have you thought about, for people who are multilingual, even in the United States, we have so many languages spoken, except we just don't talk about it. Right. So whether, when you look at those priming words, right, the way people interpret them, I think it's also they're grounded in cultures rather than just simply can be categorized by, let's say, the first language people speak, right?
Right. Yes. So we have embedded in the metadata, we have country, because you can't get much closer than that without violating GDPR. So we have the language that the browser is in, which would indicate their normal browsing patterns, right? Even if they're taking it in English, if the browser's in Spanish, that tells you something. We have country. And then as one of our demographic questions, we ask them their native language, but we haven't dug into any of that yet. So I think you're going to see differences in patterns if you are pinpointing sort of different areas, and people who have browsers in a different language than the one they're taking, or they say their native language is a different one than they're taking. So I do think we have some data that will capture a little bit of that, but we couldn't get much closer by like asking, where are you currently living, or where did you grow up? Because that caused so many IRB issues that we were just like, okay, we won't do it. But I would love to see, because you've seen those maps of word usage across the United States, like Coke versus soda versus pop. I imagine you would see those differences come out too, based on the cultural differences of the regions. So we have a little bit of that in there, and I haven't looked at it yet.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to drop off, but I'll just say thank you again so much, Erin.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Y'all have an excellent day.
You too.